I stood there, heart racing and palms clammy, as the words echoed around the elegantly decorated hall. And to think she almost joined the army instead of marrying Eric, my father had said with a laugh, as if my service in the U.S. Army was some punchline. I'm Vanessa, 27 years old and a first lieutenant, and in that moment, I felt my chest tighten. It was my dad's wedding, sure, but it felt like a betrayal. I could see my mother's eyes darting to me across the crowded room, the tension thickening like fog. All I wanted was to blend into the background of his new life, not to be thrust into the spotlight as a joke. When my father's words hit me, I was no longer just a spectator at his big day. Suddenly, I was thrust back into the memories of long nights spent training, battling loneliness and fear in a world where women like me were still fighting for their place. I'd given up so much for my commission, friendships, time with family, moments like this that were supposed to be joyous. And yet, there I stood, a soldier reduced to a punchline in his quest for social grace. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks as I caught glances from distant relatives, their familiarity with me aligning them with my father's humor. My stomach twisted at the thought of being reduced to a caricature of the soldier, not real Vanessa, the woman fighting every day for respect. It didn't help that just that morning I'd seen a news segment highlighting women in combat roles, showcasing brave soldiers like myself, and here I was, diminished in a moment where I should feel proud of my service. The air felt thick with unspoken judgments. I could almost see the headlines flashing in their minds, the viewers at home likely thinking, what a shame. I fought back tears, feeling the weight of my uniform pressing down on me like a suffocating cloak. I wanted to shout, to reclaim my story, but the words lodged in my throat, fear and frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. As the best man raised his glass and the laughter swelled around me, I took a step back, retreating to the dimly lit corner by the bar. I needed air, something to ground me amidst this storm of laughter that felt so foreign. I picked up a drink, my hand shaking slightly as I tried to steady my breathing. The wedding, which I had initially hoped would be a celebration of new beginnings, had quickly turned into a reminder of how easily people could dismiss my sacrifice, as if my dedication could be reduced to a light-hearted quip. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing my disappointment. Just as I took a deep breath to calm myself, a voice cut through the laughter. "Is that Lieutenant Hart from the news?" I turned, and to my absolute horror, several guests were pointing at me, their excited murmurs echoing my face on their screens. The juxtaposition was too much to bear. On one hand, my father's thoughtless jab, and on the other, the truth of my service being recognized, yet still feeling invisible in this family celebration. I managed a half-hearted smile, knowing all too painfully that my father's wedding insult had backfired. His guests had all seen me on the news that same night. Before I go on, subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell the untold stories of military women, courage, sacrifice, and truth. Your support helps more voices like mine be heard. I stood at the edge of the reception hall, watching as the laughter and clinking glasses filled the air with a festive buzz. My dad was marrying someone new today, a woman he'd only introduced to us a few months back. I'd been skeptical, of course. I still carried the weight of my parents' divorce, the way it splintered our family and left jagged edges in my heart. But I put my doubts aside, slipping on my best smile as I greeted family and friends who had come to show their support. After all, the Army had taught me the importance of duty, even in our personal lives. I wanted to be a good daughter, so I wore my uniform with pride. Yet, it felt like a shield, hiding my uncertainties from the bright lights of the celebration. As Dad stood at the altar, beaming at his future bride, I couldn't help but notice the way his hands shook just slightly, clasped tightly together. I remembered how he had always been the steady one in our family, the rock amid the chaos of my childhood. But today, under that veil of happiness, I recognized an undercurrent of desperation in his smile. I wanted to believe he was genuinely happy, that this new chapter was a fresh start. The truth, however, was complicated, and I could feel my heart clench at the thought of my little brother sitting with our grandparents, blissfully unaware of the emotional turbulence brewing just beneath the surface. It felt like I was being torn in two. My duty to my father clashed with the protective instinct I had for our family. The speeches began, one after another, each intended to celebrate love and happiness. I listened as my dad's best man recounted humorous anecdotes, drawing chuckles from the crowd. But I noticed the way my sister and I exchanged glances, a silent language only we could understand. Then, it was my turn. As the first lieutenant, I felt duty-bound to take the mic and say something heartfelt. But in a moment of frustration, maybe it was my military training kicking in, or maybe just the tightness in my throat, I took the opportunity to deliver what was supposed to be a playful jab. Dad, love can be like a tour in the army, challenging, with lots of unexpected surprises. Just remember, if it gets tough, we don't abandon ship. The crowd laughed, but a flicker of discomfort passed over Dad's face. I regretted it almost immediately, but the moment passed so quickly, and the laughter rattled inside me like a bitter aftertaste. I tried to brush it off and drown my thoughts in the free wine, but as the event continued, I could see the cracks in the facade. Dad's eyes would dart to my sister and then me, as if searching for approval or perhaps an apology. I didn't want to ruin his day. I wanted to be the supportive daughter, but I felt that damned familiarity of confusion creeping back. Was I just supposed to ignore the swirling chaos that had led us here? I searched for clarity in the faces of our family and friends, but all I saw were twisted expressions, the laughter barely masking underlying tension. By the time I got home, I was exhausted. I threw my uniform onto the bed and looked at myself in the mirror, trying to reconcile the soldier staring back at me with the daughter I felt I had failed to be today. My phone buzzed with notifications, and I picked it up, surprised to see a news alert. Local Army lieutenant makes waves at family wedding. It was a clip of my speech, a grainy version showing my ill-timed humor and Dad's awkward laugh. I sank into my chair, the weight of it all crashing down. I had wanted to poke fun, to lighten a fragile occasion, but now I felt like it backfired, and the disappointment stung more than I'd anticipated. The reality of our family's fragile foundation had been laid bare for the world to see, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made things worse. The moment I saw the photo in the newspaper, my stomach twisted. There it was, the picture of me, smiling awkwardly in my dress uniform, a medal shining on my chest, standing next to my dad at his wedding. The caption, an innocent enough summary of the event, felt like an electric shock to my system. It was the last place I ever expected to see my face, especially not right after that debacle. The wedding had been about him and Lisa, not me, but somehow, I became the unwitting focal point. That's what happened when you were the proud daughter of a newlywed, and when the family dynamics felt like a battlefield. When my dad introduced me to the guests, it was supposed to be a proud moment. Instead, he took a deep breath, looked me squarely in the eyes, and said, "Vanessa's done well in the army, maybe better than I did in my entire life." The laughter that followed felt like shrapnel cutting into my skin. I wanted to shrink away, to disappear from their sight. I knew he meant it as a compliment, but coming from him, the comment felt like both a weapon and a shield, a reminder of how heavily my past loomed between us. I could see the glances exchanged amongst his friends, eyes narrowing with skepticism as they sized me up, creating a narrative that felt miles away from my own reality. I was a soldier. My life was about discipline, camaraderie, and unwavering resolve. Yet here I was, stuck in this moment of vulnerability, caught between my duty and his offhand insult. The laughter echoed in my ears even as we moved on, and I tried to shake it off, but my mind looped back to the headlines on television, reporting on everything from troop deployments to the latest political squabbles. I was supposed to be tough, yet his words felt like they had sent me back to the barracks, standing in front of my commanding officer, trying to earn respect while battling the doubts that came painfully close to the surface. That night, after the wedding reception wound down, I was alone in my room, staring blankly at the ceiling. I replayed the day's events like a video on repeat. I could almost hear my father's voice layered with the sound of laughter around me, drowning out my own accomplishments. The irony hit hard. Here I was, a first lieutenant in the army, tasked with leading others into challenging situations, yet I struggled to face my father in this one. I yearned for acceptance, but I feared the cost of showing that vulnerability might only widen the rift between us, the very thing I had fought so hard to overcome in my own life. I switched on the television, desperate for distraction, and there was the news anchor, reporting on my dad's wedding. It felt surreal, the juxtaposition of my world colliding with the civilian life that seemed so foreign to me. My eyes widened when they cut to a clip of me, a quick flash of my awkward smile captured in a moment that felt like a lifetime of tension compressed into a single frame. It wasn't just my father's casual jab that haunted me, but the realization of how I'd become a part of his narrative without my consent. I sank further into the couch, the weight of confusion pressing down. For the first time, I understood the complexity of those familial bonds I'd always taken for granted, and it scared me more than any battle I'd faced on the field. I remember the day of my dad's wedding like it was yesterday. It was a muggy June afternoon, the kind that made you feel sticky just standing still. I was to be the dutiful daughter, standing on the sidelines as he married Patricia, a woman I didn't quite know but had heard enough about to form my own judgments. They had met through mutual friends, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were more suited for a sitcom than real life. As the first lieutenant in the Army, I was no stranger to tough situations, but this was a different battlefield. This was family. The ceremony itself was a whirlwind of awkward smiles and strained greetings. I engaged in small talk with relatives I hadn't seen in years, all the while feeling like an outsider in my own family. I caught sight of my dad looking radiant but somehow oblivious, caught up in his own world. I think that's when the simmering frustration inside me boiled over. As Patricia began her vows, sweet and earnest, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of anger at the whole charade. Did she really think she could step in and fill the void left by my mom? Did my dad even think about how I felt? My stomach knotted as I watched him beam with pride beside her. When it was finally time for my toast, my heart raced. I wasn't brave enough to turn the moment into a roast, though I desperately wanted to, but I still needed to say something that made people listen. So, against my better judgment, I made a comment about Patricia's impressive collection of ceramic frogs. The family erupted in laughter, and for a brief moment, I felt a rush of satisfaction. But then I caught the look on her face, a mix of embarrassment and disappointment. I regretted it immediately but continued to force a smile. It was a weak attempt to poke fun, intended to bring levity, but deep down, I knew it was an insult. I didn't expect the joke to backfire in the way it did. Later that night, I braced myself for the fallout. The reception turned out to be a minefield of awkwardness, every glance made me cringe. But what I'd never anticipated was that evening's news cycle, which would feature a segment on the wedding of a local Army officer's father. Suddenly, my words were blasted across TVs, and there I was, their only daughter, apparently the punchline of my dad's most important day. They played it on repeat, showing clips of my toast and highlighted my cringeworthy jab about Patricia's frogs. My phone blew up with texts, messages from friends and colleagues, asking if I was the one making fun of my dad's new wife. I was mortified. The backlash felt like a grenade exploding in my face. My dad called me later that night, and there was a strained silence before he spoke. I could hear the disappointment in his voice, a familiar tone that had haunted my childhood. The soldier in me knew how to endure, but the daughter felt utterly defeated. I had wanted to make a mark, to assert myself in this new family dynamic, but instead, I'd crushed what little goodwill existed. I realized then that no matter how hard I trained to face combat, navigating family relationships would always be the toughest mission of all. I remember the sick feeling in my stomach as my dad stood up at the front of the reception hall. He was giving his usual bravado speech, totally unaware of the weight his words carried. I had just returned from a 6-month deployment and felt like an imposter on what should have been a day of celebration. He was talking about family, loyalty, and then, like a punchline that everyone seemed to see coming but me, he made a crack about my non-traditional career choice. The room erupted into laughter, and I felt my stomach twist. Sure, I could laugh along with them, but something in me felt frozen. It was as if a piece of me went missing that day, a part of me that had fought tooth and nail to ensure that my worth wouldn't be determined by anyone's casual jabs. I stood there, gripping my glass of water, staring at the tablecloth as though it held all the answers. My father had always been the kind of man who thrived on expectations, the kind who believed that military service was a family affair reserved for the men. And here I was, standing before family and friends in my uniform, trying to forge my own identity in a world that made it a little clearer with every joke that I somehow didn't belong. That night, I decided I would do anything to prove him wrong. I didn't want to just be the daughter who took the road less traveled. I wanted to be the daughter who achieved something so undeniable that even he would have to acknowledge it. And so, as the night wore on, I started to strategize. I quietly turned my attention to the news clips I had been working on for the past few weeks. The mission I was involved in was big. We were trying to stabilize a city that had been torn apart by conflict. I wanted to believe that sharing our efforts on camera would help change perceptions, not only about my work but about women in the military in general. That weekend, I called in favors from a few friends in public affairs. I wanted my story out there, not for glory, but to highlight the sacrifices made by those who serve, especially women who fight every day just to be recognized. When the news broke that night, I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the screen with bated breath. It was surreal to see my face broadcasted to the world, talking about the resilience of the people we were trying to help. I watched the segment, feeling a rush of pride swell within me, but I couldn't shake the nagging worry about my dad's reaction. Would he see me as I truly was? Not just the daughter, but a leader on the front lines, doing everything I could to make a difference. I could almost hear him scoff, as if my accomplishments were nothing more than an elaborate joke. But when I got the text from my sister, "Dad is watching you," I felt a shift inside, a sprig of hope that maybe he would understand. The next day, my phone buzzed incessantly. Friends from the unit, fellow soldiers, and even a few strangers reached out, praising my courage, and that recognition felt so overwhelmingly good. But it was the message from my dad that hit the hardest. It was short, just a simple "proud of you." I wasn't entirely sure how to feel about it, torn between joy and disbelief. It was enough to remind me that the road to being seen, to being worthy of respect, is paved with moments like these, where you take the sting of insults and turn them into your armor. In that fleeting moment, I understood that my journey was just beginning. I had proven my worth not just to my dad, but to myself, and that was a victory I would carry into every new challenge. I knew this wedding would be tough, but I couldn't have predicted the tidal wave of emotions crashing over me that day. My dad had gone all out for this ceremony, complete with a band and an open bar, all to celebrate his new life with someone else. I stood at the back of the hall, palms sweaty, heart racing. The juxtaposition of family and unfamiliar faces left me grappling with the weight of my own thoughts, trying to navigate the remnants of my childhood while holding firm to the adult I'd become. I kept my uniform crisp, my posture straight, but inside, I felt like a storm. When Dad offered his speech, I braced myself. As the words spilled from his mouth, I felt my stomach churn. There was humor, stories of camaraderie, and a strange sense of nostalgia in his tone, but amidst it all, he threw in a jab at my career choice. He joked about how his daughter, the first lieutenant in the army, was the only one who could take orders and not know how to follow them. The laughter that erupted from the crowd only deepened the chasm between us. It made me question whether he understood what I'd sacrificed or how hard I worked to earn that title. I felt my face flush, anger and hurt coiled within me. That moment propelled me forward, though, not just emotionally, but physically. I didn't want to stew in his words all night. I stepped outside, gulping in the crisp air, needing to distance myself from the noise inside. My phone buzzed insistently in my pocket, and I glanced down to see I had a missed call and a flurry of messages from friends in a nearby city. I looked at the news app, and my heart sank. There, on the screen, was a photo of me in uniform during my recent deployment. My friends had tagged me, and suddenly, I was thrust back into a world that was beginning to feel like a distant memory. As the images flooded my mind, the laughter from the wedding faded away. I remembered standing guard on the bases, the camaraderie shared among soldiers, the resolve that had helped me through deployments, and the pride I felt wearing that uniform. I realized that I had been shaped by my experiences, molded into someone who could stand on her own. It wasn't just about taking orders, it was about leading in challenging times, making decisions under pressure, and continually pushing through adversity. I could either let my father's words choke me or let them fuel a fire that would remind me who I was. Returning to the wedding, I felt steadier, grounded in my own truth. I didn't need validation from my dad. I could see my friends' messages of support, and I was reminded that I had forged a path away from all this. When I walked back into the room, I held my head high, silently promising myself I wouldn't let anyone bring me down. Whether my dad understood my sacrifices or not, I would continue to thrive in my role and not let fleeting laughter tarnish my achievements. The wedding continued, but something had shifted within me, a quiet resolve to embrace my identity completely and unapologetically, despite the jabs and misunderstandings. I stood there, the clinking of glasses and muted laughter swirling around me like an echo of a life I no longer felt a part of. It was my dad's wedding, and while I had hoped for a day filled with joy, all I could think about was the sting of his words. Vanessa's been in the army long enough that her combat boots have more personality than her. The guests laughed, the punchline hitting its mark, but it felt like a wound splitting open. Yet, I knew I had to keep my composure. After all, this was his day, and I would not let my feelings overshadow it. As the evening wore on, the weight of my father's joke settled in my chest, turning bitterness into determination. I thought about all the drills, the early mornings, the lives I was trained to protect. To him, maybe I had become a punchline because I had chosen a life filled with discipline, grit, and purpose, but to me, it was everything. I had worked hard to rise through the ranks, proving myself in ways that seemed invisible to him. Each day in uniform forged a new part of my identity, one that I had to fight to defend, even if it meant standing alone at a wedding reception, feeling like a forgotten guest at my own life. The biting comment replayed in my mind as I photographed guests dancing and laughing, all while I scanned them for an exit strategy. I needed a distraction. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to find a text from my best friend, Camila, who was always able to read my moods. "You on your way to coming out swinging, or are you just going to let it slide?" I chuckled softly, knowing she would understand my frustration. I texted back, "Self-control tonight. Tomorrow, I'm hitting the gym hard." It was a commitment I had made to myself long before this evening, but her words ignited a fire. I had a mission, not just to prove my father wrong but to grow beyond his expectations. Later that night, the camera crew from our local news channel set up nearby, probably to cover the wedding. I had kept my distance from them, but an idea sparked. What if I took the sting of my father's words and flipped it? I decided to approach them, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that surged through me before a difficult operation. As I shared my experiences in the army, it felt like reclaiming my narrative. I was not just a number on a uniform. I was a first lieutenant, a leader, and someone who had faced adversity head-on. The report aired that very evening, showcasing not just my career but the importance of resilience. When it concluded, I felt a wave of hope surge through me. As the night came to a close, I couldn't shake the feeling of empowerment I had discovered amidst the hurt. Perhaps I would never change my father's perspective, but I could change how I perceived myself. In that moment, I realized that growth often requires stepping away from the shadows, even if it means standing in the light alone. I could persist in my path, reshaping the narrative that had long felt entrenched. When people recognized me from the broadcast in the following weeks, they saw a woman who had forged her own identity, not one defined by the past but one who had risen beyond it. The wedding insult hadn't just served as an inciting incident, it had ignited a fire I never knew had been waiting inside me. I remember the first time I felt the weight of loss, and it came crashing down on me in a way I never expected. It was the day my father got married again. I was standing at the back of the chapel, clad in my uniform, with my heart racing at an unexpected speed. It wasn't the wedding itself that had me on edge, but rather the knot in my stomach as I watched him say I do to someone who wasn't my mother. The groomsmen and bridesmaids all wore smiles, but I felt like an outsider, a relic from a past my father seemed eager to forget. My family was scattered, our history reduced to awkward moments over lukewarm coffee and forced pleasantries. On the surface, I was calm, composed, ready to fulfill my duty as the dutiful daughter. Yet, inside, a whirlwind of emotions churned. I had always thought we shared a bond thicker than blood, but in that moment, I felt more like a ghost haunting the edges of his new life. As the ceremony progressed, I watched him beam with joy, and it struck me with a pang of bitterness. Was my father happier now that he had moved on? Or perhaps he had simply chosen oblivion over grief. The questions swirled, but I buried them beneath a harsh glare. When it was my turn to speak, I underestimated how a few poorly chosen words could spiral out of control. The ceremony reached its climax, and amid the cheers and well wishes, I stood up. I knew I should tell a heartwarming story or express my happiness for him, but in a moment of weakness, I let the hurt boil over. I made a jab about how he had always been good at abandoning things he loved. Eyes shot to me in shock. I'd intended it as playful, maybe even a little funny, but it fell flat. The silence was deafening, and the laughter I had hoped for never came. Instead, a wave of regret washed over me. I hadn't just insulted him, I had thrown a grenade into a fragile situation. After that moment, I slipped out of the chapel, my heart pounding in my ears like a distant battle drum. I could hear my father's laughter morphing into an awkward silence, and I felt like running away from my own life. I hurried to my car, fingers trembling as I held the steering wheel. Just then, news blared from the radio, a report about a military operation where casualties had occurred. My stomach dropped. A part of me wondered if that chaos was somehow preferable to the turmoil I had just unleashed. How could I have let my emotions dictate my actions so recklessly? I turned off the radio, my heart heavy with both regret and relief, wishing the ground could swallow me whole. That evening, the news cut in with breaking coverage from the wedding. The irony stung. As I saw the footage replay, my face flashed across the screen. The wedding crasher turned the shamed daughter. Somehow, the whole world now knew of my blunder. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends and acquaintances, some supportive, others less so. Each ping felt like a mockery of my mistake. The sharp pain of isolation hit hard. I thought about my fellow soldiers, the bonds we forged in battle, and how this felt like the first genuine conflict I had faced in years, not one fought with guns or tactics, but with the raw fragility of family. The hardest battles often come from within, after all, and I was far from winning this one. I stood in the back of the room, arms crossed and a steady pulse of nervous energy coursing through me. My dad's wedding was supposed to be a celebration, but with every laugh and toast, I felt more out of place. The sparkly decorations clashed with my military boots, and the Taylor Swift songs swirling through the air served as a stark reminder of the life I had put on hold. The ceremony was a reminder of all the conventional paths I'd left behind in pursuit of something I believed mattered more. But that understanding felt thin in a room full of people who didn't get it, who sometimes snickered at my choice to serve. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, swallowed the lump in my throat, and tried to take a deep breath. I could see the expectant faces, my dad's new family, my relatives who barely knew me, and a couple of old friends from high school. I had arrived prepared to honor my father's new chapter in life, but as I opened my mouth, all I could think about was how to prove my worth, how to shake off the feeling of being a disappointment. You know, my dad used to say I could never have a normal life because I chose the army, I started, trying to keep my tone light. The laughter seemed to echo back, but I couldn't tell if it was genuine. I pressed on, perhaps too forcefully. Well, at least I'll never have to worry about getting divorced, because I'm pretty sure my life is harder than that. The atmosphere got tense, and I realized, too late, that my attempt at humor landed flat. The laughter turned to discomfort, glances exchanged, and a few of my cousins shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I took a quick step back, my cheeks heating up. I had intended to be witty, to shift the spotlight onto myself for a moment, but now I just felt like I had crashed into a wall. My dad steered the conversation elsewhere, and I slid back into my seat, deflated. The weight of the moment felt heavier than the rucksack I trained with. For a few seconds, I could only hear my heartbeat, pounding in time with the muffled voices around me. I wanted to hide, to slink away until the wedding ended, but before I could spiral too deeply, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a news alert, Army LT. Vanessa Thompson recognized for valor in overseas deployment. I blinked, perplexed, expecting the digital buzz to pull me away from the pain of embarrassment. But instead, it had the opposite effect. My heart swelled with the recognition, but guilt wrapped around my chest like a vice. I could hear my dad's voice in my head, reminding me that being known for my service shouldn't feel like a trophy that diminished the importance of family. Yet, there it was, a headline that could erase my cringeworthy moment at the wedding. Before I could process it, I glanced around the room and noticed a few faces lighting up with pride as they whispered about me, the recognition I'd been striving for now woven into the fabric of this moment. They were proud of me, even in the context of my awkward joke. No, I hadn't meant to offend, but I also realized, with a strange sense of clarity, that my life, my experiences, were worth celebrating. It was a reminder that my peers, my comrades in arms, would always understand the sacrifices I made, the weight I carried. They saw me for who I was, and it felt like a patchwork of recognition stitching together the frayed edges of my identity. In that moment, as the laughter shifted and conversations resumed, I stood a little taller. I recognized that I wasn't just Vanessa, the girl who made an ill-timed joke. I was also Vanessa, the soldier, the daughter, and someone who could still make a mark in a world that often overlooked the complexity of choices. I'd stumbled at my dad's wedding, but that didn't diminish what I had achieved or the strength I carried within me. That day would be a moment of vulnerability, but it also reminded me that recognition can come from the most unexpected places, even amidst the toughest of family gatherings. When my father stood up at the wedding reception, I could feel the energy in the room shift. His voice boomed, drawing laughter from the crowd that was merciless yet familiar. I had grown up hearing him make jokes at my expense, each one crafted to slice through whatever dignity I was trying to build. This time, it was a jab about how I was the only daughter who couldn't even win a fight with a pillow. The laughter that erupted was thunderous, but it felt like a punch to my gut. It wasn't just any gathering, it was my father's second wedding, and instead of feeling joy for him and my new stepmother, I felt the weight of ridicule and resentment pinning me down. I could almost see the smirks on the faces of family members, people who had no idea of the battles I fought every day, both out there on the field and within the confines of my own family. It's not easy staying strong when both your country and your bloodline seem to take pleasure in your shortcomings. I'd spent years training, pushing myself past my limits, yet in this moment, I was reduced to a punchline. The tears I fought against were a testament to the conflict brewing inside me. Should I confront him now or let it slide, just like every other time? But the truth is, I was tired of smiling through the pain. I searched for the exit, but sitting at the front was like being trapped in a cage. Each laugh felt like a reminder of how I'd never quite fit into his ideal world. Growing up, I thought I could earn his approval, that if I became tough enough and strong enough, he would see me, not just the girl in combat boots but his daughter, the person I wanted him to be proud of. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, wishing I could change into the first lieutenant I am every day, commanding respect and acknowledgement. Instead, here I was, questioning my worth over a few poorly timed jokes. The moment stretched into infinity until I finally pushed my chair back, the sound cutting through the laughter like a knife. I moved toward him, heart pounding, each step heavy with the significance of what I was about to do. I'd rehearsed this in my mind 100 times. But standing there, facing him, the words tangled in my throat, spitting out only a fraction of the hurt I felt. Dad, enough. My voice was steady, defying the trembling in my chest. The room turned quiet, eyes darting between us, curiosity piqued. I could tell that they wanted to see how this would unfold, the same way they liked a good fight on the battlefield. I may not have won every battle, but I've fought my share and more, I continued, anger fueling what I had once kept bottled up. You think a joke makes you superior? It doesn't. It only shows how little you really know about me. I was finally standing in my truth, and I could see the surprise on his face. The laughter faded, replaced by an almost palpable tension. I couldn't back down now. I was no longer the girl who allowed his words to shape her reality. With every word I spoke, I felt lighter, like I was breaking free from the chains of expectation. I didn't just want him to listen, I wanted him to understand that I wasn't just someone to be ridiculed. I was strong, I was capable, and I was his daughter. The wedding day was a blur of awkward smiles and strained laughter, but I still remember the moment my dad made that joke about me. We were all gathered in a sunlit banquet hall, decorated with white silk and flickering candles, a stark contrast to the chaos that had enveloped our family leading up to this day. Dad stood up, glass in hand, and took a breath before launching into a story about his little girl, who had once been scared of her own shadow. It wasn't long before he veered off course, remarking about my decision to join the army. I always thought Vanessa would be a dance major, guess she takes after her old man, sneaking off to fight battles no one else wants to. There was laughter, but my stomach twisted. It wasn't just a joke, it carried an edge of mockery no one else seemed to catch. As I tried to laugh it off, a wave of embarrassment washed over me. Sure, I had my decisions, but did he really need to drag my career into a roast? I thought about the countless hours of training, the weight of the uniform on my shoulders, and the sacrifice I had made. But just then, I felt a surge of defiance. I was standing before family, people I cared about but who often saw me through a filter that didn't quite clear. I chose to fight for what's right. I wanted to shout, but instead, I just raised my glass, joining in the laughter that stung deep inside. It felt like drowning while everyone else danced above the surface. That night, after the cake was served and the dance floor had filled, I excused myself. I needed an escape. I stepped outside, breathing in the cool night air, trying to shake off the unpleasant taste of Dad's words. Instead, I found a small group of my cousins huddled around a phone, their faces illuminated by the screen. My heart dropped as I realized what they were watching, the news. There I was, just a few minutes earlier, in the middle of a live report discussing recent events from a deployment I'd barely managed to evade. I turned away, a flush creeping across my cheeks as I heard my name spoken with unexpected gravitas. "Is that your sister?" one of them asked, voice tinged with awe. I managed a weak nod, feeling the tension rise in my chest. It was surreal, seeing my two worlds collide, my family, with their expectations and jokes, and the reality of my life as a first lieutenant on the news. The juxtaposition felt heavy. They had only just seen me as a joke, and now I was being painted in shades of courage and resilience. It made my stomach churn, the way their admiration felt complicated, almost undeserved. Were they finally recognizing me for who I was, or was this just another fleeting moment of convenience? Back inside, I attempted to return to the festivities, but the weight of my father's words lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that, despite being a soldier, I was still the little girl he mentioned. The night wore on, and the laughter continued, but I felt like an imposter in my own skin. I wanted to yell, to scream that my identity was not a punchline, that my decisions were rooted in my own strength and conviction, not for the amusement of those who barely understood. But I tucked the feelings deep inside, pretending to be fine, to be just another guest at a wedding. Later, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized the public perception might have changed in that single moment on the news, but the struggle to be seen for who I truly was remained. I had fought for respect and recognition in combat, yet here I was battling for the same within my own family. The irony stung. It was a reminder that sometimes, the toughest battles weren't fought on foreign soil but right at home, in the hearts of the people we love the most. Standing at the altar, watching my dad's face twist into a scowl as he delivered that backhanded insult, I felt a strange mix of anger and empowerment. It was like the wind had been knocked out of me while simultaneously lighting a fire beneath my feet. For so long, I craved acceptance from my father, from those who made me feel less than. But as I stood there, the weight of their words began to evaporate. I realized I didn't need their approval to be who I am, a first lieutenant, a woman carving her own path in a world that often belittles me. The army taught me resilience, and now, in this moment, I was finally shedding the remnants of their small-mindedness. That night, watching the news report on my deployment, I felt an odd sense of vindication. It was surreal to see my face flash across the screen, a stark contrast to my father's disdainful words. I had fought hard to reach this point in my life, breaking through barriers and stereotypes, but there was still a part of me that hesitated to fully embrace it. In the wake of my father's comments, I realized I had been allowing his voice to echo in my mind, dictating my self-worth. As I watched the clips of my fellow soldiers and me, the camaraderie, the strength, the purpose, I felt liberated, almost like I was simultaneously shedding years of doubt and embracing the woman I had become. After the broadcast ended, the flood of messages from friends and even strangers filled my phone. Words of support and admiration poured in, reminding me that while I may not have had my father's approval, I had earned the respect of those who truly understood the battlefield. I realized that I was not defined by my family's perceptions but by my actions, my dedication, and my journey. The condescending remarks from my past were now a whisper in comparison to the roar of encouragement from the people who mattered. I finally understood the power of choosing my own family, those who lifted me up rather than holding me down. Seated cross-legged on my couch, surrounded by the people who lifted me up, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. Grinning at the sound of laughter echoing from the kitchen, I felt at home. The warmth of acceptance enveloped me, richer than any hollow praise I'd once sought. I began to realize that the sentiments I chased, the validation I craved, were misplaced. The truth was, I had been fiercely fighting for my place in the world all along, and that was something no one could take away from me, not my father, not anyone. I was not just a daughter, a soldier, or a target of ridicule. I was Vanessa, and that was enough. As I stared out the window, the night sky was ablaze with stars, a powerful reminder of the countless dreams yet to be realized. In that moment, I pledged to myself that I would continue to shine, refusing to let anyone dim that light. Each star twinkled with possibility, blending into the vast expanse, reminding me that I am part of something larger than my past.